Good evening, members. Okay, I'd like to open the meeting for EPH tonight. Okay, first of all, I just want to read the fire evacuation procedures. Okay, there are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately, and the fire exit is located to the rear of this room. Okay, go down the stairs and we'll meet in the War Memorial Park. The other exit is back through behind me, okay, and then down the main stairs, okay, and out through the main entrance. Okay. Members, please note that this meeting is being webcast live, okay, and can we please ensure that mobile phones are either switched off or turned to silent. Okay. I just want to share, before I go through and start the meeting proper, I just want to share my plan, okay, for tonight's meeting. Okay, so we're here to get an update on tonight's paper on the fire safety in high-rise residential buildings. The Chairman's final report on the Task and Finish Group. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Tomlin. Okay, an update on the adopted transport strategy, and then review and comment on the initial preparation of the new leisure park master plan. We do have a very packed full agenda tonight, just like normal, I suppose. And so to give all members an opportunity to comment, I'll be restricting members initially to one comment question per section or group of sections. And if members have asked their question and wish to have a supplementary, then please can that member ask me, okay, as chair. If there's time, okay, and all members have been given an opportunity to comment, I'll then ask for more questions, okay, and we'll go around again. If we run out of the allocated time for that section, I will stop the questions and move on to the next section to keep the meeting going. So, first of all, we have the fire safety in high-rise buildings, okay, and I want to allow about 30 minutes for that. I intend to go through the paper fairly quickly, starting with the introduction from the portfolio holder, from Councillor Carr, and then skipping section 1, okay, see if we've got any questions on section 2 and 3. But where I want to focus our time is in section 4, where we can get updates on the individual buildings. Okay, I then intend to take the rest of the paper, which is sections 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and appendix 1 together as a group. Moving on to the Chairman's final report on the Task and Finish Group with the recommendations, I want to allow up to, around 15 minutes. As many of the committee members are on the Task and Finish Group, hopefully there'll be consensus across the committee that the recommendations can go to Cabinet. I'll ensure that the report and its recommendations are then scheduled for presentation to Cabinet. Then moving on to the update on the adopted transport strategy, I've kind of got it in the plan here that will allow about 60 minutes. I'll have a very quick introduction from the portfolio holder, Councillor Ganesh, okay, and then unless anyone's got a question on the executive somewhere in the background, I suggest we start at section 3 on the key projects and go through the key projects, okay, kind of one by one. And then after the key projects, I'll take the rest of the paper together. Finally, the Leisure Park Master Plan. I want to allow 75 minutes for this because I think it's vitally important that we ensure that this is scrutinised correctly. We'll have a quick introduction from the portfolio holder, Councillor Isaac, and if no one has any questions to the executive summary, then I'd like to move straight to section 2, the proposal, and then take sections 3 and 11 together, and I then want to spend our time on appendix 1, the master plan, where initially I'd like to take this basically one slide at a time. Okay. So then after that we'll move on to the work programme. So, okay. First of all, apologies for absence and substitutions. Section number 1. Okay, I've got Councillor Robinson substituting for Councillor McIntyre. Okay, and I've also got apologies from Councillor Adji Peters. Are there any more apologies? No? Okay, moving on. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, that's great. Okay. Urgent matters, number 3. I've been advised that there are no urgent matters. Okay, does anybody have any urgent matters that we weren't made aware of? No? Great. Okay. So then moving on to item number 4, the minutes of the meetings held on the 9th of June, okay, and then continued on the 21st of July, and then the meeting on the 5th of September, and then the meeting on the 18th of July, which was then adjourned to the 1st of September. Are the minutes agreed? Councillor James.
Thank you. Can I refer to the just some actions outstanding from the 1st of September, page 19? Did I miss, we requested a written response on the fee paid to ACON and whether the council had been negligent in complying with the monitoring requirements. Did we receive that? I don't know. And the other one is the last bullet point on the page, a response on this statement of common ground would be provided to members. Have we received that?
At this point, I have not received those. Okay, what I'll do is I will take them offline, discuss with officers, get the answers, and I'll circulate it to the committee. Okay, Councillor Cubitt.
Minor issue, ACOM spelt wrong, just for future reference. It's AECOM. And if people look at this in a couple of years' time, they won't know which company it was.
Excuse me, Councillor Cubitt. Councillor James, thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Cubitt, can you just repeat that, please?
So yeah, if people look at this in the future, they won't know who ACOM is because they don't exist, or they might be a different company. But the company that we actually had was ACOM, which is AECOM, so it's a typo.
Thank you very much. Well, we've got that, we'll get that sorted out. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so then moving on to with the exception of the answer to the amount that ACOM has paid for and the comments made by Councillor James and the typo by Councillor Cubitt, are the minutes agreed? Councillor James.
So I just saw another couple on the other side, page 20.
Sorry, can you
just in relation
tell us which one it is?
Page 20, so it's further work for a further study, and I'm just was wondering where we are on that, particularly in relation to number 6 and 8.
Okay, I've just been advised that they've actually been responded to by Cabinet. Okay. Okay, and the responses in the Cabinet meeting. What I'll do is, can we get those circulated specifically to the committee? Thank you. Okay, so with the exception of those points, is everybody happy for me to sign these minutes? Agreed? Thank you. I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. Okay, so moving on to number 5, the fire safety in high-rise residential buildings. Okay, and for a quick introduction, I'd like to introduce the portfolio holder, Councillor Carr.
Good evening, members. Good evening, Chair. We're bringing forward, as we do each year, an update on the fire safety in high-rise residential buildings in the town and across the borough. I won't detain you too long with an introduction, as most of what I wanted to say is set out in the forward, and we're very keen to get on to your questions. What I would draw out is that, since the tragedy of the Grenfell disaster, this council has committed to work with government and our partners and developers and organisations and managing agents responsible for high-rise residential buildings to ensure that our residents are safe in their homes. This is very much a priority for us. Officers in our housing safety team continue to press responsible persons to monitor progress, provide transparency for residents, and most importantly ensure that unacceptable risks are dealt with where they are exposed. So really over to Chris to give a brief introduction to the report.
Thank you. Right, I won't go through the whole report, but I think I'll draw your attention to some key points, what I think are key points. The first being 3.1, and that being that the government, Michael Gove at the time, was very forthright that the mistakes of the past should be paid for by those that made them, so the original building owners in most cases, and that will be quite important as we come on to look at what's happening locally. Moving on to the next section, I mean, there's a whole raft of new legislation that comes in. A lot of that will be for our colleagues at Hampshire Fire and Rescue to enforce or to look at, and they've got a dedicated team that's currently going around the county keeping an eye on these types of buildings. 3.2.4, that is how building owners are supposed to prioritise the risk of these types of buildings. Again, that is very important when building owners have a lot of these types of buildings. So some local authorities might own 3, 4, 5 of these high-rise buildings themselves, and that this would indicate how they would prioritise that work. So, in very simple terms, the very high priority they should do first, and then move down the ladder. There's not a huge amount of companies out there with the capability to one, undertake the assessments and then do the actual work. So that's why these need to be prioritised in order. Moving on to the Building Safety Act, I think the key point there is that the HSC is now known, or will be known as the Building Safety Regulator in England. They will be consulted on all planning applications for this type of development, and essentially in 2024 they will be able to direct us as a council and our colleagues in Hampshire Fire and Rescue, if they feel there's a risk, that they will direct us to investigate how they see fit. The fire safety regulations in 3.4, just some, I think, quite common sense measures that will be part of that, and all of these were outlined in the Grenfell inquiry. So again, I won't go through them all, but I think they're quite good common sense measures. And again, a lot of those will be for our colleagues at Hampshire Fire and Rescue to monitor. Moving on to the local picture, Crown Heights. This time last year, we reported that they had successfully bid for funding to replace the whole of the cladding at Crown Heights. That hasn't happened. That hasn't gone forward. That's partly drawing back to my highlighting of Michael Gove's statement earlier in the year. The original builder of the blocks, their Barretts, have indicated that they will do any necessary works and pay for it all themselves. So that is the reason for the delay. Last spoke to them about 2 weeks ago, and they're actually on site at the moment doing a risk assessment to indicate what works are going to be done. They've also committed to come back to us with the results of that risk assessment so we can have a look, and I'll be sharing those on Hampshire Fire and Rescue as well. Moving on to Winster Way, you've probably seen the scaffolding up there. It's quite obvious. They've finished one block already. This was just the top 2 stories there. It was just the penthouses. So they finished the first one there already. The next 2 blocks are, I think, ongoing at the moment. The completion date is still estimated to be March 2023. So that's a good news story. I think even better news there is that originally the leaseholders were looking at quite a hefty contribution. They'd already paid $1,500, and there was significant fears that might spiral and rise even further. The original developer there has signed the developer's pledge, which would mean that they would accept financial liability. So there's a chance there that there will be no further costs, and even that any costs they have already paid may be reimbursed to them, which again I would suggest is good news. But that hasn't been confirmed as yet, as far as I'm aware. And the last one, probably to make you aware, is a new development that's down by the fire station, the train station, Normandy House. That's currently still being developed, but it looks like shortly that will be in use. The plan application predated the point at which HSC were made a statutory consultee, so that wasn't something that went to HSC, but I've had initial conversations with developers there who seem very helpful, very open, and they've committed to sending us their risk assessments and all the technical specifications once they've done that. So that's all I really want to highlight to you, and if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to pick them up. Right.
First of all, if we just take this in stages, I'd like to look at section 2 and section 3 first, please. Okay, has anybody got any questions on section 2, section? Okay, Councillor Cubitt and then Councillor Konesko.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, just very briefly, when I read this paper, it talks about Crown Heights and Winchester Way, but your table refers to Skyline, Churchill, Pemberley, and Oakridge, and then you also then tell us a little bit about what's happening with the one near the train station. So, what's the situation? Forgive me if I'm being ignorant with regards to Skyline, Churchill, Pemberley, and Oakridge.
Yeah, thank you. The Crown Heights and Winchester Way are raised as needed some information because they failed safety tests. The others all passed safety tests.
Thank you. Councillor Konesko, please.
Thank you, Chair. This might be a related question. Section 3.2.4 talks about the different priorities, risk factors, risk levels of the buildings, the tiers 1 to 5. Do we know in which categories the buildings in question in our borough fall?
Good question. I'm glad you asked it because, yes. Oh, well, we do for Crown Heights, and that's done. A colleague, me and building control colleague, sat down and had a look at that with what we knew. So it won't be exact, but we wanted to have a look at that because of the delay with Crown Heights. So actually, Crown Heights was and we actually took the worst case. When we didn't know the answer, we assumed the worst case scenario. So we may have been slightly over generous with our scoring, but it actually came out as tier 4, as low priority. And I stress that was just me and a colleague in building control with what we knew. But yeah, that's what that came out of. We didn't do Winchester Way because it's nearly finished, and the others were all past their tests. So.
Is supplementary?
Yes, just very quick supplementary. Why hasn't that work been undertaken properly by the developer or the landowner for Crown Heights?
Okay, so yeah, going back to this time last year, they've been approved for I think 5.5 million. It was going to be huge. They were going to have to wrap the whole of Crown Heights in scaffolding, in netting, and take every square inch of cladding off. And that could still happen, but what they're doing is going to do some fresh safety tests based on the most recent guidance there. You can imagine living in Crown Heights, if you had that netting outside your house, outside your window, for months and months on end, would not be a pleasant experience. There's also, in flats across the country where this has happened, there's knock-on effects with things like damp and mould and cold, because it's not only the cladding, it's the insulation as well. So it's not something I think you should take lightly. I think fundamentally, as well as all that, they're not looking to go down that route anymore with the funding. Barrett's have said they're going to fund it themselves. So the government funding, public money, would not be spent on it.
Right, okay. Are there any more? Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on 3.31. It's the fire safety order. How many floors does this? So how many? Is it 6 floors high? What is the cut-off point for the fire risk assessments?
It's 18 metres. It's the cut-off for high rise.
Okay, I need to know how many floors that is. Sorry to sound pedantic. 18 metres is how many floors?
It's difficult because some floors are higher than others. You can typically say probably about 2.5 metre per floor. So, but that I can't give you an actual fact for because some properties might have 11. I guess 11.
It's about 6 then, is it? That's
yeah, roughly, yeah. But
okay. I'll come back to ask some other questions shortly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions on sections 2 and 3? No? Okay, let's move on to section 4, please. So let's take Crown Heights first. Okay, Councillor McCormack, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of related questions on 4.1.1. Costs met, top of page 29, para 3, costs met from the Wake and Watch Fund for interlinked alarm system, wall replacement, cladding replacement estimated to be greater than 5.5 million. work's likely to take at least 2 years to complete. We don't have a date. Do we have an anticipated date when these will be done? And it's stated here that some costs would not be eligible for funding and therefore have to be passed on to the leaseholders. So do we know how much?
This is in the background section, so this is where we were last year. Barrett's have committed to meeting all costs themselves. So and I think the key point there as well is that was based on removing all of the cladding and replacing it. Since then, the guidance has changed in that it's done on risk to life. So there's a new assessment in place, and that's what's being done right now. And the results of that will determine what works are needed. So it may not be the case now that all that cladding needs to come off. They may be able to do more measures or different measures that would achieve the same result in risk without all that huge amount of work that and money being spent.
Thank you. Well, I'm a little bit more confused now because I have seen this letter in the back addressed to residents dated 6th April 22, but it now turns out that they might not get their cladding replaced at all because they don't think it's dangerous. But initially they had a survey that said, oh, there's nothing wrong with your cladding. A subsequent survey said, no, your cladding's got some of these prohibited materials on, and now they're trying to say that the materials aren't actually dangerous. But we've just had Grenfell, so I don't understand how they can get away with that.
I just stressed they haven't said that. It was just one possibility that the assessment might highlight. What they have done is they've committed to come back to us with the results of this assessment, so we can independently look at it, and we can use our colleagues at Hampshire Fire and Rescue, who are the experts in this, to look at it as well. And if we don't feel that what they're proposing is safe or will reduce risk enough, we will tackle it. But nothing's been decided yet. It's just a possibility at this stage.
Right, thank you very much. Any more questions? Okay, Councillor Carruthers and then Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. There was a comment about from Chris about the fact that obviously in some ways maybe this is a good thing because it would have been 2 years of work for this 5.5 million work, and there would have been all these nets around the windows and etc. etc. For me, Grenfell was 2017. I want to know how are the residents feeling about this, because surely their priority is that they want to be safe, not a concern about what the short-term work will cause to them in terms of disruption. So I really just want to know how closely are we working with those residents in terms of how they're feeling about this and their preferences for how this is dealt with.
For a start, we've liaised with colleagues in the housing team. There's been no approaches to them for anyone wanting to move house, and you have to remember there's a lot of social housing in these blocks of flats as well. So there's no one shouting that they'd like to move and they feel unsafe. I think Barrett's and First Port have regularly liaised with residents and leaseholders here. Sorry, I forgot what was the other part to your question.
Well, I was just asking about how the residents felt, really.
I mean, I think, yeah, it can't be a nice situation to be in, but I think that there has been regular dialogue with them, and I will stress as well that I was just highlighting that replacing the cladding in its entirety, it wouldn't necessarily be an easy job. If that's what needs to be done, we'd certainly support it still, but it's not necessarily a nice way to go. It wouldn't be a nice thing for the residents to have to encounter either.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chris, for your work on this. Firstly, in section 4.2.1, I just have a question.
Sorry, Councillor Rattigan, I haven't quite got there. We're still dealing with sort of Crown Heights. Okay.
My apologies, Chair. I was just so anxious to get on with it.
Sure.
Thank you, that wasn't too long a delay. 4.2.1, the Waking Watch that was implemented on the penthouse. I presume that that had the highest priority because of the risk attached to it. Otherwise, it sort of looks like housing apartheid, that the penthouse get looked after first and people further down the scale perhaps don't. I just want to comment on that. And then the original completion date, it doesn't say for which of the blocks. The bullet point underneath it, the original completion date for these works was May 22. Can you just point me on which block that was? Because obviously I don't know them intimately.
Yeah, that's not a problem. It was just the penthouses because it was just the penthouses that had the problem. It was just the cladding around the penthouse, and that's all that's being replaced there. All the way down, apart from that, the cladding's fine, but the balconies have got some issues. But the Waking Watch was only warranted to be in the penthouses because of that issue. With regards to the completion, that was the whole project completion date estimate. So all 3 blocks.
Okay, Councillor Canesco.
Thank you, Chair. Question about the final bullet of 4.2.2, which talks about the developer of the blocks signing up to the developer's pledge, meaning that they'll be accepting financial responsibility for fire safety and cladding replacement. And that goes on to say that this would drastically reduce the financial burden to leaseholders. And you mentioned, I think when you were giving your introduction, Chris, that there's some uncertainty about whether leaseholders will have to contribute anything. And that surprised me because I thought the developers, as part of signing up to the pledge, would be taking on all of the costs. So can you explain why there's still a risk that the residents might have to pay at least some of the cost of this, please?
That's purely because it hasn't been confirmed. I just don't know what they'll accept and what they'll pay. I think the hope would be that they would pay everything. That certainly seems to be the noises they're making, but I can't confirm that until they do.
Great. Are there any more questions on Wintarthur Way? No? Okay, so if we then move on to Normandy House, has anybody got a question on Normandy House? Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you. I'm just checking that obviously the conversion is going ahead. We've all seen the work that they're doing. Will building control have a input on the fire safety regulations being met within that conversion?
Yeah, I don't think it's us as an authority that are managing the building control process, but a colleague of mine in building control will be working with me once we get those plans from the developer and the surveys from the developer to again independently assess them ourselves. And again, we'll be sending that to Hampshire Fire and Rescue for them to do the same thing. But I'm pretty certain it's not us as an authority that's managing that.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, does anybody else have a question on Normandy House? Councillor McCormick, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I may have missed this one. We've got these buildings, and we've got a risk assessment prioritisation tool, of which we've got something in Appendix 1, but I don't appear to find ratings for each of these buildings. Are we saying that Normandy House is a high-risk building, or has it not been assessed yet because it's not yet been converted to residential accommodation?
Yeah, it shouldn't really need to be assessed. The hope is that it's a brand new building. It should be built to the right and proper guidelines and standards. That prioritisation tool is really only to be used when you've highlighted issues, and it's only really to be used in that case, so you can actually prioritise as a building owner perhaps in what order to do them all. We've just used it here just to give us a guide on Crown Heights, just so we know how that would come out.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to other developments. Has anybody got any questions on other developments? No? Okay, so if we then take the rest of the paper, okay, including Appendix 1, does anybody have any questions on the rest of the paper and Appendix 1? No? Okay, that's, thank you very much, members. Okay, that's the first paper dealt with. If we can just move on to, sorry, excuse me, move on to the chairman's final report for the task and finish group, please. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, obviously the report is there, and as you rightly said, very many of this committee attended the 2 meetings we had, and in summary, there were the 2 motions to deal with, clearly the preservation of the character of villages that are near to Basingstoke and the sustainable development in the conservation areas. And the executive statement, if you like, it actually basically says that there was consensus amongst the panel with the villages motion, if I call it the villages motion, that the panel didn't support the draft rural strategy at that time, which was considered not to sufficiently protect the villages from the expansion of Basingstoke town, and the rural housing numbers were challenged, especially where there was a discounted housing allocation methodology which was not actually introduced to anybody with any justification. The assessment of the rural settlements was also challenged as not being specific in addressing the real on the ground issues, with a need to be thinking about villages, or even if that breaks into wards, where we have the ability to start working with those ward members and representative groups, community groups, to reallocate these specific issues and needs of each settlement to make it slightly a more thorough solution. Then the sustainable development, I mean, the bottom line there was we noted a few improvements we could do to our websites, where they're written very factually, information is there, but it's one of those things you've kind of got to be familiar with the information to actually understand it and know what to look for. So we could help there. The significant thing was there was no climate change headings when on the website, checking for possibly somebody who wanted to insulate their house or do carbon reduction programs. If you wanted to do it, perhaps the climate emergency might have been a heading you went to, but we didn't actually made a note. There was at that time nothing on the website that was sort of directing people using that as a very sort of strong topic. We noted that the head of planning had said to us that the conservation areas will be reviewed. A paper was going to Cabinet. We supported that, and any resources required to, rather than do them one at a time, try to get all the areas looked at, so that we can also incorporate in this a bit of an overhaul where Historic England give us the kind of criteria which we have to look at it, but we've also got to balance that against the climate change and basically move that forward, that to help people to do this and to balance whether we're actually harming listed buildings, whether we're harming buildings that aren't listed but are merely a local architecture. So it's something that we're hoping that in that report we would support it going to Cabinet from the review that's planned by the head of planning. So basically on that basis, with all the detailed points that are in there and the story of the whole task and finish panel, I would like to recommend this to this committee.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tomlin. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, on the recommendations. Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Chair. On the sustainability motion, there was consensus that our sort of website needed updating, and it wasn't very user-friendly. But the lead officer said we were going to update our policy. Did you give a time frame for when that was going to be done? Can we push them for that as well, please?
So, is that, should I reply? I mean, basically the answer was, as in, no, we hadn't got a direct time scale, but perhaps you're absolutely right. I missed that we should be asking for it. It sounded like it was imminent, but you're right. We didn't actually get a date. Perhaps we could ask for that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor James.
And so in relation to that review that they're going to be undertaking, as officers. I'd like to also make sure that, that we make sure that they undertake, as part of the conservation area policy, that they really focus on climate change. We need to really, and again, like Gary said, is when will that piece of work be done and fed into, and will we as members have sight of that piece of work when it's been undertaken?
Thank you, Councillor James. At this particular time, I don't have an answer for, actually bringing the work back. Okay, what I was hoping for, Councillor Robinson, in a minute. Okay, what I was hoping for was for consensus so that we can actually get these recommendations up into Cabinet, okay, and then feed it back in. Would that be acceptable for you, Councillor James? Thank you very much. Councillor Robinson.
Can I just also say, because I don't think it's any mean feat in relation to, because Chris has had to produce this report, and so I just want to say thank you, really, because I think it's not easy because you're required as the chair to produce the report in relation to resources. So thank you very much for the work that you did.
Yeah, and I'd just like to echo that from the chair. Okay, it's a vitally important bit of work that you've done. Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. If I could draw everybody's attention to basically the last 6 paragraphs on page 51 or page 7 of 27, depending which way you read it. The issue that seems to be becoming prevalent on this is the issue of double glazing in conservation areas, which is subject to Article 4. And the planning department's response at the moment seems to be, no, you can't replace your existing windows with double glazing. So it's a question of, we have a conservation policy, we also have a climate emergency policy, and it's a question of which one should take precedence over the other. And what I'm seeing, I've seen applications where somebody wants to take out wooden sash windows and put UPVC in, which is obviously one end of the scale and is unacceptable, or certainly unacceptable in my mind. But I'm also seeing applications where people want to take out wooden windows, single glazed windows, and replace them with wooden double glazed windows. And the only difference between one window, the old window and the new window, is the width of the glazing bar to take a thicker glass pack. So when you stand 6 feet away, basically, it doesn't look any different. And I would really like us to have some sort of a steer. This is coming, we've got one coming next week to DC. It's not the first one that's been flagged up to me. I spoke to Mike Townsend about it, and he said it's really not DC's job to make a policy decision which policy supersedes which another policy. He said, take it to EPH. Well, I haven't done because it's come to EPH through this mechanism anyway. So I would be interested to know what EPH's steer is on this, which policy, and takes precedence and exactly where we go with this sort of a question. Thank you.
Councillor Tomlin, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a very interesting dilemma because the understanding that I believe we gained was that Natural England set this policy, and they're effectively a government-led organisation, and we have a climate emergency, which is also. So I guess we're not getting a steer from above, and we could run the risk if we go one way of finding we could be challenged that we've allowed something that is not a recommendation. So yeah, I think I'm hoping in the review that it will tackle some of this, what I would call common sense, where something is such a fine line that I would say the climate trumps it, but there is also the heritage asset side of things, which there needs to be workaround solutions. And it sounds like there are, from my understanding, the conservation areas and what can and can't be done, there's work to be done to actually assess that. So I would hope that will come up in that. Was not a specific point that we noted, but nonetheless, it's still a very valid point. It's a specific point. Let's hope it can be covered, or you know, as for what the committee think, I don't know. We didn't tackle actually which way we should go. It was what was actually happening on the ground at the moment. So, yeah, it's an interesting question, Nick, and I don't know we can whether it comes as a subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Okay, Councillor Cubitt and then Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very good point raised by Councillor Robinson, and I also echo the congratulations of Councillor James on the task and finish group and the chairing of it. So thank you very much for your hard work. In relation to the conservation areas, they're very precious to the people of Basingstoke. But the climate emergency is a very valid one, and also the cost of living is a very valid problem, and trying to keep heat into old houses is a massive issue. I live in a single wattle and daub house. So my house is currently sucking water in through the wattle and daub, and the windows are wet every day, and black mould. And anyway, I digress. I think instead of waiting for Natural England to do something, I think we need to be innovative in Basingstoke, and we love our conservation areas in Basingstoke town, but we also know that some of the people that live there are not as wealthy as some. So I was wondering whether the council could consider a reserve account which would be means tested, and then have a design code which required sash windows, wooden sash windows with double glazing, that would be in keeping with the design of the beautiful streets that we're very proud of and the people love. And for those people who can't afford wood sash windows with double glazing, they could apply on a means tested basis to a special reserve account. So I don't know what the rest of the committee think about that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Okay, Councillor Rattigan, please.
Yeah, I was going to say that could we maybe get an answer from the portfolio holder for housing, who is...
Sorry, Councillor James, can we just have one meeting? So I'll come back to you, Councillor James.
The portfolio holder's there.
Jay.
Can I get back to you on that, Councillor Rattigan? Because I completely understand the necessity for it, and it is something that we should definitely look into. Can I get back to you on? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Cubitt, supplementary.
On a follow-up, and it's very important actually, it's in line with this, is that there's a massive problem with people who live in older buildings with mortgages and this, whatever the code is, that they have to meet in terms of energy. And again, you've got that same problem with some of the elderly who live in really beautiful parts of our town that we're very proud of and represent and reflect the age and the history of our town. And the sash window is just one bit of it that would keep the elderly warm. And we should be absolutely trying to do things like that for people who can't afford the sash windows. But also we ought maybe to be looking in the round on those conservation areas for supporting them, putting in things that ordinarily they wouldn't be allowed to because it's a conservation area.
Councillor James.
I'd just like to second that. I think it's, you know, something that we should definitely be looking at. And there's, within my own ward, there's lots of people that are living in those properties that are not in that position to be able to, and are struggling and are cold, and the house isn't suitable for their needs at the moment.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Ganesh will come back to us on that. Councillor Robinson. Okay, second question. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Councillor Rattigan. I do apologise.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to reiterate my disappointment that the local plan has been delayed. I'm sorry, Councillor Ganesh, I know you're going to hear that a few times from me, but the reality of how we shape our villages is important, and therefore we ought to be laying down the ground rules through some format of how we do it. And I only bring this to mind mostly because in the last 5 weeks, we've had 4 speculative indications in my ward There is a parish council meeting tomorrow, meeting speculative developers, because they are seeing the green light from this council as to that's what's going to happen, and we will allow no allocated numbers, no allocated sites in in my ward, and it is awful that they're having to do that to fight off development. We are lucky in Ashford Hill and Headley because we had the neighbourhood plan approved at the last council meeting, but that only gives us partial protection. No, I'm just making the point about the rural villages. Thank you, Councillor James. I don't tend to interrupt you. So perhaps I could suggest that through this committee, we have some sort of, with the councillors, some sort of ward definition of what our rural communities might want. And some of us have conservation areas, so obviously that might well play a part in it. But I do think it is important through this piece of work, and I congratulate once again Councillor Tomlin for this work, is that we get to what we really need for our individual villages or communities to say, yeah, that would work. Maybe we should think of this, because that might help in shaping, forming and allocating places that we will require building in the future. That's my only point on this great paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Okay, I'd like to now move. Okay, Councillor Robinson, you're very quick. You've got less than a minute.
So from my point of view, the contentious issue that seems to be coming up is double glazing every time. And I'd like to suggest that providing a window was replaced with one of the same mechanism, whether it be sash or flush casement, of the same material and of substantially the same appearance, that should be acceptable in a conservation area. That would be the sort of wording that I would like to see.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. I'm sure that Councillor Ganesh will come back on that. Councillor Ganesh, you have literally 15 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be quick. I would like to congratulate the Task and Finish group for all the work you've done, because this actually fell out of the part of the work that we were doing in the local plan. And I'm sure I'll take those back and come back to you with a written response on how we can add up some of those recommendations. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think there's a general consensus in the room, okay, to move with these recommendations, okay, and if there is consensus in the room, I will make sure that they are taken forward to a cabinet meeting, and I'll come back to the committee when that meeting is scheduled, okay, if that's agreeable to everybody. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Great. Okay, so if we then move on to the adopted transport strategy update, okay, we're going to have a very quick introduction from the portfolio holder, and we have in my plan we've got up to 60 minutes for this, so we do need to kind of go at pace. So, Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So the Borough Council adopted Basingstoke's transport strategy as a key document to support the implementation of the local plan, to guide preparation for its update, which we have been going through over the last few months, and other key projects such as delivery of the town centre master plan. So I'm pleased to bring an update on the progress with implementation to the committee, to ensure councillors are up to date on all the technical work that's carried out at the moment, and to explain this aligns with the delivery of key sites in the borough, as well as important documents such as the climate change and air quality strategy. So this directly linked to the responding to our climate emergency that we've declared back in 2019 and becoming zero carbon council by 2025. To improve the air quality and promote more sustainable transport options and connections within the town centre and around the borough. So look forward to hearing members' views on the issues raised and exploring how we can work together to deliver the objectives of the transport strategy. And I would like to introduce Mark Lambert to quickly introduce a bit more in detail on the paper, if that's okay. Thank you.
Very quickly.
That's great, thank you both. Yeah, just as Councillor Ganesh said, it's a jointly adopted strategy that we adopted with Hampshire back in 2019, and as Councillor Ganesh outlined, that sets the scene for more detailed technical work on particular issues linked to transport. The transport strategy itself was adopted prior to us declaring an emergency, climate emergency, in the same case as Hampshire, but the strategy really has the same underlying themes as you would expect in terms of climate change and reducing carbon emissions. It's worth highlighting to you that more recently, Hampshire published a draft local transport plan for the whole of the county. That also establishes clearly an approach to around supporting active modes, walking and cycling, greater use of public transport, and really enabling the transformation and move towards electric vehicles and greater use of technology. Hampshire also published earlier, just in the start of October, an updated interim transport statement that relates to Basingstoke, and we've arranged a joint member briefing session for Hampshire and Basingstoke councillors on the 30th of November, which you're all welcome to attend, and I'm happy to send over the Teams meeting invite details for that. Just to outline a few more of the specific projects being progressed, Hampshire have started to develop a more of a specification in terms of public transport offer in Basingstoke. That's focused on three main corridors, the B3400 in Fermanagh Down and the Leisure Park, the A30 and the A33, and that's focused around improving the public transport offer in those corridors, and we expect them to be publishing a draft consultation document in early 2023, which we'd expect to comment on. You'll also be aware that they published a draft local cycling and walking infrastructure plan this summer, which we commented on, and which we expect to see adopted in early 2023. One of the first kind of key routes coming out of that is the Many Down walking and cycling link from the site to the town centre, which we expect to be provided in the near future, and which we submitted a funding bid for in the summer to the Levelling Up Fund. And whilst we wait for the outcomes of that, we expect a small element of the route to be provided upfront by Hampshire early next year. Other things to touch on, as I'm sure you're aware, that we have been rolling out the EV charging infrastructure across the borough. We're in the process of introducing chargers in Kingsclear, recently in Bramley as well, and then my colleague had a meeting with some of the Bramley members this week, along with a colleague here. And we're looking at additional chargers in some of the community centres, and we'll continue to work with Hampshire in the rollout of on-street facilities in the future as well. We've got a programme lined up in that respect. Just a couple of other things to mention, Chair, is that we're looking to develop an electric vehicle car club in the town. We hope to be bringing forward details of that in 2023, and to highlight the good progress is being made by Hampshire in terms of the Brighton Hill roundabout proposals and the scheme there to improve safety at that junction. I think that's what I wanted to say, Chair, but happy to go through questions with members of the committee.
Thank you very much. Okay, so unless anyone's got a question on the executive summary in the background, I suggest we start at section 3, the progress on the key projects. Does anybody have a question on the local transport plan? Councillor Cubitt and then Councillor McCormack, then Councillor Ratty.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So thank you very much for this. I massively support the cycling plan, all of the active travel, everything. What I have a massive problem with is we as a country are trying to incentivise people to drive electric cars. And I do not accept, therefore, the statement that we want to reduce reliance on private cars. I am not going to come into Basingstoke on a donkey, right? And nor are my residents. And if they've got electric cars and they're not spewing out pollution, we must not fall down the trap of destroying our precious jewel in the crown, which is already very severely wounded, by banning cars or reducing reliance. Secondly, Hampshire County Council is a complete a question's coming, Chair, in a second. Hampshire County Council is a complete disaster. We have almost no public transport. So we're saying we're going to reduce private reliance and we've got all these wonderful aspirations, what are we going to travel in on? Buses? There are no buses. There are hardly any buses. They never travel at the right time. They never go home at the right time. And finally, and this is the question, is what is Hampshire County Council promising us in relation to public transport in our town, and at what price, and what is the mass transit system? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hewitt, for one question. That was nicely worded into three. Okay, well done. Okay, Mark.
I probably can't comment too much on behalf of Hampshire, but I think it's worth coming along to the session on the 30th of November to raise those kind of points, because I think they're valid matters. Certainly in terms of Stagecoach, they're a commercial operation, and so Hampshire have relatively limited role in the provision of public transport, other than services that are in the evenings at weekends, which is when Hampshire and the Borough Council steps in to fund some of those services. So that's probably one particular point to address. I know Hampshire are working on a public transport strategy for the 3 corridors I mentioned, so that will outline how they envisage improving public transport provision for Basingstoke residents, such that they have a better offer, such that services are more frequent and they have better journey time reliability, and that the bus vehicles themselves are of a better quality. So I think we'll have more of an understanding of that once that document's published in early 2023. And just to pick up on your final point around provision of road space for vehicles and the like, I think we fully recognise that a large part of the borough is rural, and there will continue to be a reliance on the car for people to access the town centre. So I accept your point in that respect, but I think it's about planning and making provision for alternatives such that people don't have to rely on the car, whether in walking distance or there's a public transport option available.
That's right.
Councillor Ganesh, very quickly, please.
Can I just quickly add on to the Mark's response about we cannot talk on behalf of Hampshire County Council. However, we can definitely take all your views and concerns back to Hampshire County Council in any form, i.e. today or the 30th, the briefing that Mark had arranged would be an appropriate platform to raise your concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. In a minute. I'll come back to you, Councillor Hewitt. I would just like to say it's all very well having this briefing on the 30th, but as I understand it, it's in the afternoon. Okay, the majority of members here are actually working, myself included. Okay, so we actually feel excluded from this particular briefing. Okay, which is vitally important for this committee. Okay, so Councillor Hewitt, your supplementary very quickly.
It's very important that we do not absolve ourselves of responsibility just by saying, I'm sorry, it's not responsibility of us as Hampshire County Council. We cannot construct policies or the future lives of our residents and then say, but I'm ever so sorry, I'm not responsible for highways because that's Hampshire County Council and we have got no control over Hampshire County Council. And we have never, as a council, ever got our partners in and said, actually, you know what, we're really not happy. So what my final question, well, it's not a question, but it's really, really important that I say this, is that this 15-minute neighbourhood is a nonsense, and I want it removed from our policy. I don't know what other members think, and I'll tell you why it's a nonsense. It's constructed by a Canadian. It refers to city living, where you get metros and tubes and buses. We don't have a metro. We don't have tubes. We don't have buses. So how can we be genuinely advocating constructing 15-minute neighbourhoods when we have absolutely almost no public transport whatsoever? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hewitt. Okay, do you have a response or no? Okay. Oh,
the comments are answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to Councillor McCormack, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, actually, it's something that begins before the executive summary, because it mentions made of improving air quality in reference to a air quality strategy, or what is the status of the air quality strategy? I would have expected to have seen a bit more in the text about how we were going to improve our air quality, especially when we consider that there are certain known black spots like the Ringway East, which is solidly congested in the AM and PM peak times between Blackdown roundabout and the A33 roundabout. So I'd like to understand what's happening on air quality. And the other thing, mention has been made as well about at charging infrastructure and rolling out chargers and funding to deliver chargers in 40 locations on page 78, point 3.21 and point 3.20.
Excuse me, Councillor McCormack, can we
Yep.
just stick to the local transport plan? We'll come on to charges, that's
okay.
as a separate bit,
But,
please.
yeah,
Thank you.
okay, but my immediate term question is that we don't appear to be saying very much about what we're doing on air quality, and we did have some very concerning measurements about air quality from years ago that don't appear to have been addressed.
Thank you, Chair. We do have an adopted climate change and air quality strategy, and the update on that is going to CEP in a couple of weeks' time. In particular, on air quality, though, we do an annual return that goes to the government. I believe it goes to DEFRA each year on the air quality kind of issues and hotspots around the town, such that we maintain dialogue with them on the situation. So that's something we do annually, and we keep close tabs on with colleagues in environmental health.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you. Obviously, I welcome the EV charging point in Anchor Yard in Kingsclere, so that's great. There is nothing in here talking about the cycle car interactions, because quite frankly, a lot of drivers get frustrated with cyclists, and cyclists get frustrated with car drivers, and there is no mention of that. No mention either of the A339, which is going to be one of the biggest corridors coming into this town, with Manny down at the top and a huge development coming in Newbury for their the appeal's gone through, so that work will happen. I just think the report does not pick up on where we think some of the pinch points are. Currently, the traffic sometimes back past Weybrook on the A339 coming in the morning, no mention, and I think we ought to fill in some gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Okay, I've basically got 3 speakers, and then I'd like to move on to the next subject because we're kind of out of time. So, Councillor Konesko.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to build on the points that Councillor Cubitt had made about, if you want to reduce reliance on private car travel, we've got to be more ambitious. I was reading today in Germany, you might have heard about this as well, they're now offering a limited train, bus and tram travel for German residents for €49 a month. So you can use any of those modes of transport across the whole country for €49 a month. We need that sort of thinking here, because that, if you can just use limited public transport for that sort of money, that's going to get people out of their cars, that's going to get them using alternative modes of transport. Putting in an MRT, which appears to be nothing more than a bus using existing highways, is not going to do that. So I think we do really need to up our game. And then just the second point, just wanted to echo Councillor Frost's comments about the meeting on the 30th. I'd love to attend, but I can't make it. So if we can, given the importance of this, if we can ask Hampshire County Council for a second date as well at some point in the evening, that would be hugely appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Konesko. Okay, I've got Councillor Tomlin, then Councillor Carruthers, and then we'll move on to the next subject.
Thank you, Chair. Well, very briefly, yes, I pick up on the car and the car parking, electric cars. We'll all be using those soon. But unfortunately, this document for me is not very informative. And what worries me, we've got a date here. This is the county. They're setting this strategy. Early 2023, I think was said that we will be getting that. Well, we'll be probably, hopefully, getting our draft local plan sorted if we're following a timetable like we did this year, ready for Section 8, 18 consultation. So therefore, we pledged infrastructure first. And if we don't know what we're getting and how we're going to solve it, how is this going to inform our local plan, given the date? I think there's something called urgency that the county are missing. So really, it's a comment, but what's your response to that? Can we speed things up or get some meat on the bones?
Thank you, Chair. So the draft, the Reg 18 was the sort of a beginning of the local plan process. So this is one of the documents that produced towards it, and you'll probably be scrutinising the infrastructure delivery plan at some point, which will be part of something that will be contributed towards the local plan. So this is one of the documents that contribute towards it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Carruthers. Councillor James, I did see you and also Councillor Watts, but unfortunately we're timed out on the subject, so I do apologise for that. But Councillor Carruthers is the last person to speak on this item.
Thank you, Chair. More of a comment than a question, but we talk about the delivery of a high-quality public transport network. We talk about reducing reliance on the car. But as someone that lives in a more rural ward, we can't expect to reduce the reliance on car unless we can change things dramatically, and I don't think this does that. So to give you an example, I last week paid £850 to pay for a pass for my son to get to college and back. That will last him 9 months. I've got 2 other teenage sons who regularly go into Basingstoke. It costs £7 each time they go into Basingstoke. We're now thinking about getting some driving lessons for my son because we're going to have to pay that amount of money again next year when he starts college again. So, you know, if that's what we're looking at, if that's what we're asking our residents to pay for a service that, I mean, this is a 20-minute walk from my house, this bus stop. So I'm not sure at the moment we're doing enough to encourage people out of the car, and I agree with Councillor Cubitt that we can't expect that of our residents unless we're going to do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's probably worth highlighting that although I suppose the public transport and the costs associated with that are stagecoach and a commercial matter, the LC whip, which may not solve all of the issues you described, is a borough-wide document, and it does include some of the other settlements outside of Basingstoke and looks at the improvements that could be made such that walking and cycling will be made easier in time. So there is that opportunity down the line. Chair, if you're happy, I can just pick up a couple of other points that were made.
If you are extremely quick, yes.
It's probably just worth highlighting this is simply an update report on implementation, and there is a more detailed strategy document that this is updating around. So members may wish to have a look at that because that touches on some of the issues that have been raised this evening. It was published and adopted in 2019, so I can send around a link if that's helpful.
Sorry, I understand your desire to manage a meeting, and you are managing it well. I have to say that I will make a formal complaint if you don't allow Councillor James and Councillor Watts to contribute. I think it's very unjust and it's not reasonable, Mr. Chairman, and you've been very reasonable so far, but I think it's not fair on them to exclude them, especially as it was my fault because I went on too long.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. As you're aware, unfortunately, it is within the Constitution for me to actually move the meeting along. Okay, we've already had over the time limits for that. That particular point on the agenda. In the papers, and unfortunately, Councillor James and Councillor Watts raised their hands at the very last moment. And I physically don't have the time to do that. So hold on, Councillor Cubitt. If you wish to
scrutiny.
Councillor Cubitt, if you wish to make a complaint, then please do. Thank you. Right. So I'm just, Councillor, please be quiet and let's move on with the actual agenda. I understand if you have a complaint, then please, go forward and make it. Okay. To the relevant people. Thank you. Right, so just moving on, to the interim transport station statement for Basingstoke. Does anybody have any questions on that? Councillor James.
So we never actually discussed 15-minute neighbourhoods. They just appeared in the local plan. I would like us as a committee to have a discussion about those and for us to debate 15-minute neighbourhoods, because it just suddenly happened, and it wasn't if it was a political decision, we never actually discussed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. Does anybody else have any questions on the interim transport statement for Basingstoke? No, that's great. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, to the draft cycling. Sorry, Councillor James.
Is it possible, Mark?
Mark?
I can give a brief answer, Chair. In terms of the MRT presentation, that's one of the issues that we covered at the briefing on the 30th, and I've noted the comment around the timing of that, so it may be possible we have an extra session, so leave that with me. And in terms of the 15-minute neighbourhood, this is something that's emerged at a national level as kind of best practice. It's filtered down to the local transport plan at the county level, and it's the advice that Hampshire Advising kind of we take forward as a theme in the future when we develop policy.
Thank you, Councillor James. Supplementary?
I'd quite like to have some detail around that. I mean, it appeared in the policy in relation to the local plan, and a lot of us are really concerned around it in relation to what the implications of it relating to that development plan. So I think that we ought to have a debate about it in relation to EPH, really.
Thank you, Councillor James. Okay, I have been advised that should you wish that subject to come forward to this committee, you can submit a work request form. Okay, and I'm sure we can send.
As a committee,
just hold on, Councillor James, please let me finish, and we can arrange for you to be sent that form for completion. Okay, thank you.
I think it's also that we could, as a committee, say, do we want that as a subject matter to be discussed? You know, it's two members here have said they want it. I don't know that it's necessary for us to fill in a work programme. I think it's what we could agree. Is that something we would like to look at?
I've just been advised that whilst everyone can just agree, okay, the reason for having the work programme request is so that we can know exactly what needs to be discussed, okay, in all its nuances. So I'd appreciate that whilst we have 2 or 3 people agreeing, okay, if the committee is agreed in that you complete a programme, a work request programme form. I'll arrange for that to be sent to you. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Watts.
Thank you. Mark, you said we're going to get on the 30th report on the rapid transport scheme. Are we going to get one or not? Do you know? Or do we have to wait to the 30th?
The 30th is a general briefing on kind of transport matters from Hampshire's perspective and an update on where we are with things, but it will cover the MRT strategy and will outline kind of a bit more about the frequency, the routes proposed, and the kind of offer we would expect to have down the line. It will obviously be subject to funding bids to ensure the capital is there to deliver that.
Supplementary there?
Well, it's not going to be mass rapid transport, is it? It's going to be buses. So why don't we just come clean with everybody and, you know?
Personally, I've started to use the term high-quality public transport network. I think MRT is a term that Hampshire use, but I think we do recognise it's bus-based, and it's making use of dedicated road space to enable that journey time reliability.
So, sorry, just so as a quick comment back to you, Mark, thank you for that. I know that Hampshire have said for the past 6 months or so that MRT equals buses. Okay, but if we give dedicated road space to these buses, okay, then we're disadvantaging all the rest of the the road users. Surely it'd be better to have an MRT that would be raised track as they've got in Cardiff, or the DLR, okay, something like that. It's very cheap to actually put together. That's what Hampshire, I believe, should be bringing through as MRT. And on that, does anybody else have any questions, okay, on the interim transport statement? No? Okay, so let's move on to the draft cycling and walking infrastructure plan. Does anybody have any questions on that? Councillor Watts.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously I support this. There's lots of warm words, but when we're going to see some detail?
Thank you, Chair. The draft LC Whip, as it's called, was published in the summer, and I think now it's the next stage, I suppose, in terms of Hampshire adopting that, and then beginning to work up individual schemes for key routes. The first scheme is the one slightly later down on the paper, is the Many Down to Basingstoke route, which envisages a fully kind of segregated walking, pedestrian route and cycleway built to the latest design standards that the government have outlined. And it's so that cyclists have their own dedicated space, they don't have to share the pavement space with pedestrians. And I think over time they're beginning to work these up on a corridor by corridor basis.
Councillor Watts.
What about the existing cycle network in the borough? It's very fragmented.
You're right, Councillor Watts. There are some shortcomings with some of the network. Equally, we've got some good routes as well. I think the LC Whip, as it's called, starts to map out where these are and how we can make those missing links come together. So we've got a more comprehensive network across the board.
Mark, you able to circulate that report on a link?
I'll send that round with the transport strategy link.
Wonderful, thank you. Has anybody else got any questions on the draft cycling or walking infrastructure? Councillor McCormick. Sorry, I've got Councillor McCormick, then Councillor Canesco.
Okay, so section 3.10, it says that the draft LC will be adopted in, well, I imagine it's early 2023, so you've got less than 2 months, a year left to go now, with more detailed pieces of work on specific routes. Now, I suggested a couple of extra routes to go in, and I had a couple of email exchanges with people in the county and the transport department. Oh yes, we'll look at that, and haven't heard anything since. So when will we get notification of some of these routes, and what sort of notification we can get for some of the routes that we might want added? Certainly in the Brighton Hill area, there were gaps in what their provision was aiming to achieve. Some fairly significant, Gershwin Road, for instance, doesn't have any pavements or anything, and there's some really difficult journeys that residents have to make on foot, on grassy slopes, etc., to get to bus stops. There were also implementational difficulties with extending the mixed mode dual path footpath cycleway from Brighton Hill roundabout past the shops and down towards the existing cycle path on Hatch Warren Way. So when are we likely to get some indication that they're looking at these schemes and considering any improvements?
Clearly, Chair, there are a large number of areas to look at across the borough. So I know I'm conscious that Hampshire need to prioritise the routes and to focus on the main corridors. That's why we've seen the Many Down to Basingstoke Town Centre link looked at first. I think the next scheme they'll look at down the line is the A30 corridor coming in from Hounsonfield to the golf course towards the town centre. So they're very much looking at those kind of arterial routes. I suspect it will be some time before they look at the individual neighbourhood areas in more detail. It's probably worth looking at the LC Whip as a start of a 10 to see what the shortcomings are in there. And if there are still some missing links, you're able to pass them on to Hampshire via me if that's helpful.
I've already made that notification. It's just trying to get an idea of timescale, because, as you say, it is a very ambitious set of proposals covering just about every neighbourhood. But, you know, are we looking at 3 years? Are we looking at 10 years? We've got a 2030 carbon neutrality target, so 10 years is going to be a little bit late for that.
It's probably best I don't speculate on the timescale for another organisation, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, and finally, on this subject, Councillor Canesco, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is related to that, actually. We mentioned in 3.9 that there were some gaps identified in the network as part of the response to the consultation on the draft strategy in the summer. I was just wondering, Mark, if you could give us a quick overview of what some of those gaps were.
I think Councillor Konechko, it in some ways reflects the comments that Councillor McCormick made. You know, those gaps around some of the neighbourhoods where there were missing links, perhaps a bus stop isn't well served by a footpath, or where we've got the Radburn layout developments where you don't necessarily have direct walking links to where you want to go. So it's those kind of connections that are currently missing. Alongside that, we've got some gaps in the network on the main corridors where perhaps you've got a dedicated route, but you haven't got a route around or through a roundabout. So those are the kind of more strategic ones we've also identified.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to move on to the money down to Basingstoke Town Centre cycling route, please. Does anybody have any questions on that? Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is on the bridge over the Ringway, because I've heard conflicting reports on what is going to be proposed for the bridge over the Ringway. Initially, we were looking at having a new bridge. The new bridge was going to be over 3 metres wide because it was going to be a joint cycle path, footpath bridge. I also heard from another party that they were looking at having an at-grade crossing there, which I've received with incredulity, given the steep nature of the cutting there. And I've also heard that they might be building a second bridge in parallel with the existing bridge, or just having a narrower bridge because the original 3 metre proposal was too expensive. So which one is it?
Thank you, Chair. A funding bid was put forward to the Levelling Up Fund in the summer in conjunction with Hampshire County Council that sought to secure funding for the entire route from the town centre to Manydown, and making use of the 106 contribution from that site. It envisaged a replacement bridge using the existing kind of structure that's there at the moment, but with a wider deck, so that you have dedicated facilities for pedestrians and cyclists without them merging on the bridge, recognising that the existing structure is kind of substandard in terms of its width and the feeling of the kind of perceived safety issue when you're on it. We haven't received any news on that Levelling Up bid yet, but we are hopeful. I think if it doesn't come forward, there'll be other funding opportunities that Hampshire will pursue to ensure that's provided. We did explore other opportunities in terms of at-grade crossings, which was part of the mix, but I think it was felt that the bridge would be the superior option.
Thank you. And Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you. It was just leading on to your statement just there. I couldn't understand why we were applying for levelling up, why we just didn't use 106 funding. I think we're setting up to fail because this is not levelling up, is it? It's sites that the borough and the Hampshire Council have got options to develop. And we purchased that land with an option to develop 30 years ago, when we're now going for levelling up funds. So we should be driving it through SEAL or 106.
Chair, this would make, if successful, it would make use of the Section 106 contribution that's come from Manydown, but the scale of the project and the bridge replacement I described is such that that wouldn't be sufficient to cover the entire length of the scheme. So I think it's important we look at outside sources for funding to top up what we do have in-house.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, if there's no more questions on the Manydown Basingstoke Town Centre cycling strategy, then I'd like to move over to draft parking strategy. Does anybody have a comment or a question on that? No? Okay, so let's move on to the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Okay, Councillor McCormack, I said I'd bring you back in, so if you can ask your question there, please.
Yeah, sections 3.20 and 3.21. So 3.20, still going on about the charging hub in Feathers Yard, even though that's yesterday's news as far as I'm concerned, because it was put in over a year ago. Overton, Whitchurch, Bramley, Kingsclear, okay, fine, so villages now have places to charge. Poppyfields, Rooksdown and Roxstall. If you look at Zap Map, though, there is a large area of the south and west of Basingstoke that doesn't appear to be served by any public chargers. Perhaps maybe there's one or two by the Harvester on the Old Winchester Road, and I think there might be one going in at Morrison's, but There's nothing in Brighton Hill, there's nothing in Kempshott, there's nothing in South Ham, there's nothing in Hatch Warren. The nearest charges to people living in these areas are either Aldi at Winklebury, or possibly now Morrison's, or the town centre. So are there any plans to address this large area that probably has about 60,000 residents in, that doesn't have any nearby public charger access, and we've got at least one district centre in there and several other parades of shops? That's my first question. And the other, in terms of funding to deliver chargers in 40 locations, now I assume this is on-street charging, and we did see some paperwork that said that that would start happening with roads in the town centres, but what about our peripheral estates? We've got large numbers of people living in places further out like Oakridge, Popley, Winklebury, Buckskin, Brighton Hill, South Ham, who are buying electric cars and then finding it's impossible to charge them because parking is communal in many areas. They're having to run cables out their front door or park their cars on the grass behind the back fences to charge them, and there doesn't seem to be any solution in sight.
Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up the first point around the kind of perceived kind of shortcomings in the southwest. I'm sure you appreciate we need to focus on those assets that we control. That's why we focused on our car parks, because those are more readily in our gift. There may be commercial opportunities that other landowners, such as the district centre owners, may wish to develop further application. That's something that Hampshire locations with you, so we've been able to invest, benefit from charging.
Again, sort of a related question to put these
contractor that they use to undertake the installers effectively.
Thank you.
£1,600. Every ward has a councillor discretion. He is there. Use it. Talk to your village halls. Talk to schools. Whatever. We've done it in Sherfield. It is incredibly popular. It's working really well. The three of us put the money up for it. The money is there. Get them going.
Councillor James.
Just on a point of clarification on that, we were told that we weren't able to club our money together, that a project could only have £1,000. So you can't club, if you could just clarify, because that's
Okay, I'll come back to you on that. The three of us, myself, Chris and Tony, we put £1,000 in. Between Four Lanes Trust put £1,000 in, and I think the village hall had something like £120. But if you can spend put £1,000 towards it, you can then build on that and get grants from anywhere. So it is a way to get things going forwards.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Okay, right. So if we then want to move on to the car club proposals, if there was no more questions on the EV. Sorry, say again, Councillor. Oh, okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions on the car club? Okay, at this particular time. No. Okay. Then moving forward to other updates. Okay, does anybody have any questions on any other updates? No? Okay. What rest of the paper? Okay, does anybody have any questions on the rest of the paper? No? Okay. Thank you very much, councillors. What I'd like to do now is just have a quick 5-minute recess while we reset, okay, and then we're on to the Leisure Park Master Plan. Okay, thank you. Oh, can we make sure that the